The night should have been perfect. The music still echoed faintly in the reception hall, the smell of flowers and champagne lingering in the air. She had spent months dreaming of this day, believing it would mark the beginning of a lifetime together. But as the guests drifted away and the lights dimmed, whispers began to creep through the corridors of the hotel. Something wasn't right. Her new husband had vanished from the bridal suite, and so had his best man. What began as worry twisted into a sickening knot of suspicion. Moments later, a single discovery shattered the illusion of love forever, a secret hidden behind closed doors, a betrayal so deep it would ignite a storm of rage, jealousy, and blood. By sunrise, one of them would be dead, and the truth would stain the perfect white of her wedding dress. The day had started like a dream. The sun broke through the clouds after a week of rain, casting a soft golden glow over the small coastal town where the ceremony was set. Guests bustled in the streets, dressed in their best, their faces bright with anticipation. The air smelled faintly of the ocean mixed with the sweetness of lilies arranged carefully in every corner of the church. She stood in front of the mirror in her private room, adjusting the lace sleeves of her dress with trembling fingers, not from cold, but from the overwhelming emotion swirling inside her. Years of love, of shared moments, of whispered promises had led to this day. Her friends teased her, telling her she looked like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. She smiled, but her heart was pounding harder than she cared to admit. Downstairs, her soon-to-be husband was greeting family and friends. She imagined him in his tailored suit, that crooked smile he wore when he was both nervous and happy. Beside him, always, was his best man, his childhood friend, the one he said was like a brother. They shared inside jokes she never quite understood, and though she sometimes felt like an outsider to their closeness, she brushed it off as harmless. Today, that bond seemed comforting, a sign of loyalty. The ceremony went without a hitch. Vows were spoken, hands trembled as rings were exchanged, and when he kissed her, she felt the crowd disappear for a brief, beautiful second. Applause filled the air. Photographers caught every smile, every tear, every touch of their hands. It felt perfect. The reception glowed with warm lights and clinking glasses. Laughter rolled through the hall as speeches were made. The best man spoke warmly about their friendship, telling embarrassing but sweet stories from their teenage years. She noticed, though, the way his eyes lingered a fraction too long on her husband, the way his smile softened at moments that had nothing to do with the speech. Still, she shook it away, there was no reason to be suspicious. She was marrying the man she loved, and nothing could ruin this night. Hours passed in a blur of dancing and celebration. Guests slowly began to leave, some swaying with drunken joy as they waved goodbye. The bride and groom made their way up to the honeymoon suite, her heels clicking softly on the carpeted hallway. Her cheeks were sore from smiling. She imagined the quiet that awaited them, the chance to finally breathe after the whirlwind of the day. But when they reached the room, he excused himself almost immediately. "Just a quick thing I need to check," he said, avoiding her eyes. She thought nothing of it at first. Weddings were chaotic, maybe something had been forgotten, maybe a friend needed help. She began to remove her jewelry, placing each piece carefully on the table. Minutes passed. Then more. She glanced at the clock. Nearly 20 minutes had gone by. A faint unease crept into her chest. She walked to the door, opened it just enough to peek into the hallway. It was empty. The distant hum of the hotel's air conditioning filled the silence. She decided to wait a little longer, telling herself she was being silly. But the unease didn't fade. Finally, she left the room, her bare feet silent on the carpet. She checked the lounge area, the bar, nothing. Then, from the far end of the hallway, she heard muffled laughter, low voices. Her steps slowed as she moved closer. The sound came from a door slightly ajar. She could see the edge of a suit jacket through the crack. Her stomach tightened, a cold flush rushing through her. She recognized both voices instantly. Her husband's. The best man's. The tone wasn't friendly. It was intimate. She froze, heart pounding so loud she was sure they'd hear it. A part of her wanted to turn around, to run back to the room and pretend she'd never followed the sound. But her body wouldn't move. She stood there, listening, each word blurring into the next until there was no mistaking it. This was not the conversation of two friends. The air in the hallway seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on her. The day's perfect facade cracked in an instant, and through it seeped something dark, something she didn't yet have the strength to name. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she couldn't tell if her legs would hold her weight. The muffled laughter behind the door turned into softer sounds, the kind that made her stomach churn. She leaned in, just enough to see through the narrow gap, and the sight struck her like a physical blow. Her husband, still in his wedding suit, his tie loosened, sat close to the best man on the bed. Their hands were tangled together in a way that left no room for doubt. The best man's fingers traced slow lines along his jaw, and her husband was smiling in a way he hadn't all evening, a raw, unguarded expression she had never seen given to her. Her first instinct was to burst in, to scream, to demand an explanation, but her body stayed locked in place as if her mind couldn't yet process what her eyes saw. A sickening heat rose from her chest to her head, her vision narrowing. The world around her dulled, leaving only the two of them framed in the crack of the doorway. She could hear her heartbeat thundering in her ears, louder than their whispered words. She couldn't make out everything, but fragments drifted through, memories of trips they'd taken together before she was in the picture, confessions of how hard it had been to hide their feelings. And then her husband said something that split her in two, "I wish it had been you up there with me today." The best man laughed quietly, leaning in, and their lips met. That sound, soft and intimate, was like glass shattering in her mind. She stepped back, her heel catching the carpet, and the small thud made them pause. The best man's head turned toward the door, suspicion flashing across his face. She bolted, her heart pounding, rushing back down the hall with silent, desperate steps. Inside the suite, she closed the door and pressed her back to it, her chest heaving as though she'd just run miles. Her hands trembled violently. The veil was still pinned in her hair, but she ripped it off, tossing it onto the bed as if it burned her. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, eyes wide, cheeks flushed not from happiness but from rage and disbelief. The tears came fast, hot, and she wiped them away only for more to follow. Every moment from the past year replayed in her head, the late-night calls he said were for work, the unexplained absences, the inside jokes she didn't understand. It all clicked together now in a way that made her stomach twist. This wasn't a drunken mistake, it was a truth that had been living in the shadows of their relationship from the start. She heard footsteps outside the door and froze. The handle turned slightly, and her husband stepped inside, his smile cautious. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice too even. She swallowed the lump in her throat, forcing herself to nod even though she could barely look at him. His eyes searched her face for clues, but she masked the storm raging inside her. He spoke about needing to grab something from the best man's room earlier, his words smooth, rehearsed. She knew he was lying, but she played along, nodding at the right moments, her lips curved into the smallest semblance of a smile. Inside, a plan was taking shape, dark and sharp. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew one thing: this betrayal would not be allowed to stand. She could feel it in her bones, a cold certainty settling in. He moved closer, touching her arm, but she stepped away, pretending to be tired from the day. He accepted it with a slight shrug, heading to the bathroom to change. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, her mind spiraling through 1,000 thoughts at once. Somewhere in the distance, faint music from the reception hall still played, cheerful and oblivious. It felt like it belonged to another world, one she no longer had any connection to. And as she listened to the sound of water running in the bathroom, her gaze fell to the heavy, decorative champagne bottle still sitting on the table. Her hand curled slightly, and the weight of her thoughts grew heavier still. She sat there for what felt like hours, though it could not have been more than a few minutes, staring at that champagne bottle as the water hissed behind the bathroom door. The gold foil at the top caught the soft light of the bedside lamp, gleaming in a way that seemed almost mocking. She could picture herself lifting it, feeling its solid weight in her hands, and the image lingered in her mind longer than it should have. Her breathing had slowed, becoming steady, deliberate. She wasn't thinking about the wedding anymore, or the guests, or the photographs that would sit in an album no one would ever dare open again. She was thinking about the look on his face when she had caught him, so open, so at ease, like he had finally been himself. She wondered if he had ever looked at her that way. The sound of running water stopped. Her hand instinctively moved away from the bottle, and she straightened her back. A moment later, the door opened, and he stepped out in a white towel, his hair damp, droplets of water trailing down his chest. He smiled faintly, as though nothing in the world was wrong. "You're quiet," he said, reaching for the champagne. She gave him a small nod, watching as he fumbled with the cork, the sound of it popping breaking the heavy air between them. He poured 2 glasses, the bubbles rising in delicate streams, and handed her one. She took it, holding it loosely, her fingers brushing the cold stem. "To us," he said, lifting his glass. She hesitated, then touched the rim of hers to his with a soft clink. The champagne slid down her throat like acid. She forced a smile, tasting the bitterness of both the drink and the moment. He began talking, small talk about the wedding, the guests, even a joke about the cake, and she found herself barely hearing him. Every word felt like static, like meaningless noise meant to cover up the truth they both knew but neither acknowledged. Then there was a knock on the door. Her heart skipped. He looked at her briefly, then set down his glass and walked over. It was the best man. He stood in the hallway with a casual smile, his shirt slightly untucked, his eyes flicking to her for just a second before settling back on her husband. They spoke in low tones, a kind of language made of half-sentences and shared glances. She could feel her jaw clench. He stepped aside, letting the best man in, and the air in the room seemed to tighten. They moved toward the small sitting area, leaving her on the edge of the bed. She pretended to scroll through her phone, though her ears caught every sound, the shift in their voices when they were close, the faint laughter, the way silence sometimes stretched too long. She knew she shouldn't still be here, that she should leave, but something deep inside her wanted to witness it all, to let the full weight of their betrayal sink into her bones so she could never doubt herself again. The best man eventually glanced her way, his expression unreadable. He asked a polite question about the day, and she gave a polite answer, her voice even. The 3 of them sat in that room together, and every moment felt like the slow winding of a clock toward something inevitable. Eventually, the best man stood, saying he should get back to his own room. Her husband walked him to the door, their hands brushing briefly in a way that made her stomach twist all over again. When the door closed, he turned to her, but she had already risen, gathering her things. "I'm tired," she said, not looking at him. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to read the truth in her posture, then nodded. She walked into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. The small space smelled faintly of his cologne, and the mirror reflected a face she barely recognized, eyes cold, lips pressed into a line. She turned on the tap and let the water run over her hands, the sound masking her deep, slow breaths. In the corner of the room, her gaze fell on the hotel's complimentary sewing kit. The glint of the small metal scissors caught her eye, and her fingers closed around them without hesitation. The cold metal pressed into her palm, and in that quiet, she knew something had shifted inside her that could not be undone. She stayed in the bathroom for a long time, the tiny scissors still in her hand, her thumb tracing the edge of the blade over and over. The faint scrape of metal against her skin was almost calming, giving her something sharp to focus on while her mind replayed every moment from earlier in the hallway. She could still hear his voice murmuring to the best man, still see the way his body had leaned in, the way their hands had found each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. She wanted to tell herself she was imagining it, that maybe there was another explanation, but the image was too vivid, too precise. Lies don't feel that real. The muffled sounds of him moving around in the bedroom came through the door, drawers opening, clothes rustling, the clink of glass. She gripped the scissors tighter, her knuckles whitening, but she didn't move. Her mind wasn't ready for him yet. Not until she had decided exactly what she wanted to do. She set the scissors down on the sink and splashed her face with cold water, letting the sting wake her senses. When she finally stepped back into the bedroom, he was lying against the headboard, shirtless now, scrolling through his phone as if this were just another ordinary night. His eyes lifted when she entered, and he smiled faintly, but there was a distance in it, like part of him wasn't really here. She crossed the room slowly, her bare feet silent against the carpet, and sat on the edge of the bed. He asked if she was okay, his voice casual, but she could feel the undercurrent. He was probing, testing if she knew anything. She told him she was just tired, her tone flat, giving nothing away. He nodded, but she could see him studying her from the corner of his eye. Minutes passed in silence, the kind that feels heavier with each second. She thought about the years she had given him, the way she had defended him to friends who said he was secretive, the way she had built her world around the belief that he loved her and only her. She thought about the wedding vows spoken just hours ago, the words that now felt like poison. Her gaze drifted toward the champagne bottle again, still half full on the table. She stood and walked toward it, pouring herself another glass, her hand steady despite the storm inside her. She sipped slowly, her eyes locked on his, and for a moment he seemed unsettled, like he could feel a shift in the air but didn't know where it came from. She asked him about the best man, where he was staying, how long he planned to be in town, questions that seemed innocent but weren't. He answered easily at first, but when she pushed a little deeper, his smile faltered just slightly. That tiny crack told her everything she needed to know. He tried to change the subject, telling her about a funny moment from the reception, but she barely heard him. Her mind was working now, turning over possibilities, weighing choices. The anger in her chest wasn't the kind that burned hot and fast, it was colder, more controlled, the kind that waits for the right moment to strike. She set her glass down and excused herself, saying she needed some air. He didn't protest, only told her not to be long. She stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, her pulse steady, her bare arms prickling from the chill of the air. The hotel was quiet now, most guests had gone to bed. She walked without a clear destination at first, but her feet seemed to know where they were going. The elevator doors slid open, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the floor she had seen the best man disappear to earlier in the night. The carpeted hallway smelled faintly of stale cologne and cleaning chemicals. She stopped outside his door, her hand hovering just above the wood. There was a faint sound inside, movement, maybe the clink of a glass. She didn't knock. She didn't have to. She just stood there for a long moment, listening, letting every ounce of betrayal settle deeper into her bones. Then she turned and walked away, her steps slow, deliberate. Whatever she was going to do, it wasn't going to be impulsive. It was going to be something they would never see coming. She returned to their suite with a stillness that masked the storm inside her. The keycard clicked softly in the lock, and when she stepped inside, he was no longer sitting on the bed. She could hear the faint splash of water from the bathroom again, maybe washing his face, maybe avoiding conversation. She closed the door quietly and leaned against it for a moment, taking in the room. The champagne glasses sat untouched where she had left them. One of his cufflinks lay on the floor, a small glint against the carpet, as if it had been carelessly dropped. She picked it up, turning the tiny piece of metal between her fingers, and felt a strange chill at the thought of how easily things could fall apart. Setting it on the table, she crossed to the window and pulled back the curtain. The city light stretched out below, small and distant, like another life entirely. Somewhere out there, people were laughing in bars, driving home from late dinners, living in worlds untouched by the kind of truth she had learned tonight. He emerged from the bathroom with a towel around his waist, rubbing his hair dry, and for a moment they just looked at each other. There was something almost daring in his gaze now, as though he sensed the tension but wanted to see how far she'd let it go. She asked if he had spoken to the best man again. He hesitated for just a fraction before shaking his head. That fraction was all she needed. She didn't argue. Instead, she nodded as though satisfied, but inside her mind was a whirl of carefully placed pieces moving into position. She told him she wanted to get out of the heavy dress, that she'd be more comfortable, and disappeared into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. Inside, she changed slowly, folding the dress with a care it didn't deserve anymore. Her fingers found the small scissors again, and this time she didn't just hold them, she tested their sharpness against the tip of her thumb, watching the thin white line appear before the skin reddened. She slipped them into the pocket of the robe she had put on and stepped back into the room. He was lying on the bed now, scrolling through his phone. She sat at the edge, her back to him, pretending to check her own messages, though her screen was black. After a few minutes, he set the phone down and reached for her shoulder. His touch was light, almost tentative, and it sent a ripple of disgust through her. She kept her voice calm, even playful, suggesting another drink. He agreed, moving to pour them both champagne. She took hers with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. They drank in silence, the fizzing sound filling the room. She could feel the cold metal of the scissors pressing against her leg through the fabric of her robe, a silent reminder of the choice she hadn't yet made but was inching closer to. He began talking again about the day, his voice softer now, maybe an attempt to smooth over whatever tension he thought lingered. He spoke about their vows, about the way she had looked walking down the aisle. The words might have melted her hours ago, but now they felt hollow, rehearsed. She asked him suddenly if he was happy. He blinked at the question, caught off guard, then smiled faintly and said, "Of course." She leaned in, studying his face, the tiny flicker in his eyes that told her he was lying. That flicker made something inside her settle, calm, resolute. She reached over, taking his empty glass from his hand, setting it gently on the table beside hers. Then she turned back to him, her voice low, almost a whisper, telling him she would never forget this night for as long as she lived. He smiled at that, clearly misreading the meaning. She smiled too, but hers was different, tighter, sharper, a smile that came from somewhere colder. The scissors were still in her pocket, their weight like a promise waiting to be kept. And as he lay back against the pillows, closing his eyes for just a second, she knew exactly how this was going to end. The room had grown quieter, the muffled hum of the hotel air conditioner the only sound between them. He lay back against the pillows, his eyes half closed, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening as if he thought the worst of the night had passed. She sat beside him, her hands resting loosely in her lap, her gaze fixed on the rise and fall of his chest. Every slow breath he took felt like an insult, as though he could lie so easily and still sleep soundly under the same roof as her. Her mind flicked back to the look on his face when he'd been with the best man, unguarded, content, completely different from the polite, careful expressions he gave her. That image had burned itself into her memory so sharply that it almost hurt to blink. The scissors in her pocket pressed into her thigh, their shape digging into her skin, and she could feel her heartbeat sinking with the thought of them. She stood quietly, moving toward the table where the champagne sat, refilling both glasses with deliberate slowness. The sound of the liquid pouring seemed louder in the stillness, each bubble snapping softly as it rose to the surface. She carried the drinks back to the bed, handing him one without meeting his eyes. He took it, murmuring a thank you, and sipped. She drank as well, the bitter fizz coating her tongue, her free hand resting lightly in her robe pocket where the cold metal waited. He started talking again, telling a story about one of the groomsmen, but his voice was distant, like he wasn't really committed to it. She let him speak, nodding occasionally, her eyes drifting to the curve of his neck, the line of his jaw, the place where skin met the edge of the towel he still hadn't bothered to change out of. He put his glass down and shifted onto his side, propping his head on his hand. His gaze softened, and he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. For a brief moment, she almost flinched away, but instead she leaned slightly closer, studying him as if memorizing every detail. Her voice was quiet when she asked, "If you could start today over, would you change anything?" He laughed softly, shaking his head, and said no. That was the final confirmation she needed, his refusal to admit anything, his choice to protect the lie over facing the truth. She reached for his empty glass again, placing it neatly beside hers. Then she stood, moving to the dresser as though looking for something, her back to him. Her fingers closed around the scissors, the thin blades catching the light for just a second before disappearing into the folds of her robe. She turned back to him slowly, her face calm, almost unreadable. He was watching her now, his head tilted, a slight crease in his brow. She crossed the short distance to the bed and sat beside him again, closer this time. Her hand reached out, tracing lightly over his chest, and she felt him relax beneath her touch. He closed his eyes for a moment, and that was when the cold weight of the decision settled fully over her. She wasn't thinking of the wedding anymore, or the guests, or even the betrayal itself. She was thinking of silence, of finality, of an end that would be hers to give. The blades rested against the inside of her palm, hidden but ready, the metal warming slowly from her skin. He opened his eyes again, about to speak, but whatever words he had died in his throat when he saw her expression. There was no anger there, no visible rage, only an unsettling calm that made the space between them feel dangerous. She smiled faintly, her fingers curling tighter around the scissors, and the weight of the moment pressed down on the room like the air before a storm. Everything was moving toward a single point, and there was no turning back. She stood by the window for a long time, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, the city lights behind her casting a soft, cold glow over the room. Her breathing had slowed, the steady rhythm almost hypnotic, each exhale releasing a weight she had carried for hours, maybe years without realizing. Behind her, the bed was silent, the body sprawled across it, already beginning to look less like him and more like a shell. The sheets were saturated, heavy with the metallic scent that hung thick in the air. She turned away from the glass and walked toward the bed again, her bare feet leaving faint, wet prints on the carpet. Her eyes scanned his face, still frozen in that final moment, eyes open but empty, lips parted slightly as if caught mid-breath. She reached out, not in affection but in final inspection, pressing 2 fingers lightly to his throat. There was nothing. She didn't feel relief exactly, it was more like the deep stillness that follows the end of a storm, when everything is too quiet and yet impossibly heavy. The scissors lay on the carpet beside the bed, coated in a dark sheen that glistened under the lamp. She crouched down, picking them up by the handle, and carried them into the bathroom. Under the running tap, the water turned red before swirling down the drain in thin ribbons. She washed them until the metal gleamed again, setting them on the counter as though they were just another harmless object. Her reflection in the mirror caught her attention again. She looked different now, not from the blood, not from the mess, but from the emptiness in her eyes. She dried her hands, then stripped off the robe, bundling it into a tight ball and stuffing it into the hotel laundry bag. The dress remained folded in the corner, untouched since she had taken it off earlier, its white lace now a cruel joke. In the bedroom, she began to work methodically. She wiped the surfaces she had touched, gathered the glasses, poured the remaining champagne down the sink. Every move was calm, deliberate, as if she were simply cleaning up after a long evening. She checked the hallway through the peephole, empty, silent. The best man's room was several floors away, with any luck, he would still be there, unaware of what had happened. She considered knocking on his door, telling him everything, making him see what his betrayal had brought. But then she imagined his reaction, shock, denial, maybe even pity, and decided she didn't care what he thought. This wasn't about him anymore. She dressed in a plain change of clothes she had packed for the honeymoon, dark jeans and a sweater that covered her arms. She slipped the room keycard into her pocket, along with her phone and wallet, and stood at the door for a moment, listening. No footsteps in the hallway. No voices. She opened it just wide enough to slip out, closing it quietly behind her. The carpet muffled her steps as she walked toward the elevator. Her heart didn't race, her hands didn't shake. She pressed the button, waited for the soft chime, stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected her from every angle, a stranger in dark clothes with nothing in her expression to give her away. In the lobby, the night clerk glanced up from his computer, offering a polite smile. She returned it, walking past without a pause. The glass doors slid open, and the cool night air hit her skin, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic. She kept walking, down the steps, across the pavement, past the glowing hotel sign that would now be tied forever to what had happened upstairs. The city seemed indifferent to her, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but it was moving away, not toward her. She didn't know where she was going yet, just away. Away from the bed, from the blood, from the vows that had meant nothing. She reached an intersection and paused, looking up at the red light, the way it bathed her face in color before shifting to green. She stepped forward without hesitation, merging into the quiet night as though she had always belonged there. Behind her, high above in that hotel room, the truth lay still and silent, waiting for someone else to find it. If this chilling story gripped you, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more true crime stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next dark tale. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in her place? She stood by the window for a long time, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, the city lights behind her casting a soft, cold glow over the room. Her breathing had slowed, the steady rhythm almost hypnotic, each exhale releasing a weight she had carried for hours, maybe years without realizing. Behind her, the bed was silent, the body sprawled across it already beginning to look less like him and more like a shell. The sheets were saturated, heavy with the metallic scent that hung thick in the air. She turned away from the glass and walked toward the bed again, her bare feet leaving faint, wet prints on the carpet. Her eyes scanned his face, still frozen in that final moment, eyes open but empty, lips parted slightly as if caught mid-breath. She reached out, not in affection but in final inspection, pressing 2 fingers lightly to his throat. There was nothing. She didn't feel relief exactly, it was more like the deep stillness that follows the end of a storm, when everything is too quiet and yet impossibly heavy. The scissors lay on the carpet beside the bed, coated in a dark sheen that glistened under the lamp. She crouched down, picking them up by the handle, and carried them into the bathroom. Under the running tap, the water turned red before swirling down the drain in thin ribbons. She washed them until the metal gleamed again, setting them on the counter as though they were just another harmless object. Her reflection in the mirror caught her attention again. She looked different now, not from the blood, not from the mess, but from the emptiness in her eyes. She dried her hands, then stripped off the robe, bundling it into a tight ball and stuffing it into the hotel laundry bag. The dress remained folded in the corner, untouched since she had taken it off earlier, its white lace now a cruel joke. In the bedroom, she began to work methodically. She wiped the surfaces she had touched, gathered the glasses, poured the remaining champagne down the sink. Every move was calm, deliberate, as if she were simply cleaning up after a long evening. She checked the hallway through the peephole, empty, silent. The best man's room was several floors away, with any luck, he would still be there, unaware of what had happened. She considered knocking on his door, telling him everything, making him see what his betrayal had brought. But then she imagined his reaction, shock, denial, maybe even pity, and decided she didn't care what he thought. This wasn't about him anymore. She dressed in a plain change of clothes she had packed for the honeymoon, dark jeans and a sweater that covered her arms. She slipped the room keycard into her pocket, along with her phone and wallet, and stood at the door for a moment, listening. No footsteps in the hallway. No voices. She opened it just wide enough to slip out, closing it quietly behind her. The carpet muffled her steps as she walked toward the elevator. Her heart didn't race, her hands didn't shake. She pressed the button, waited for the soft chime, stepped inside. The mirrored walls reflected her from every angle, a stranger in dark clothes with nothing in her expression to give her away. In the lobby, the night clerk glanced up from his computer, offering a polite smile. She returned it, walking past without a pause. The glass doors slid open, and the cool night air hit her skin, carrying with it the distant sound of traffic. She kept walking, down the steps, across the pavement, past the glowing hotel sign that would now be tied forever to what had happened upstairs. The city seemed indifferent to her, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, but it was moving away, not toward her. She didn't know where she was going yet, just away. Away from the bed, from the blood, from the vows that had meant nothing. She reached an intersection and paused, looking up at the red light, the way it bathed her face in color before shifting to green. She stepped forward without hesitation, merging into the quiet night as though she had always belonged there. Behind her, high above in that hotel room, the truth lay still and silent, waiting for someone else to find it. If this chilling story gripped you, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more true crime stories that keep you on the edge of your seat. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next dark tale. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in her place?